Hey, sixth grade. Um, I saw that in the video I posted earlier this morning, the sound function wasn't working. So we have to redo, or I have to redo, I should say, the Greek mythology and religion lesson. And that's really too bad because that video was really good. It had a lot of really funny jokes in it. Um, so unfortunately, we're just gonna have to save those for a rainy day. Um, but anyways, uh, I'm gonna just start that video where I left off on the previous video from earlier this week. So we were talking about the Greek major and minor gods, um, and um, sort of their contribution to Greek culture and Greek daily life. Remember, Greeks were polytheists. That means they believe in many gods. Like a lot of other polytheistic religions, they believed their deities had a direct influence on their daily life. They believed that mythology surrounding their gods and goddesses could explain things like the origin of the world, why things are the way they are, why certain natural events occur that science was not yet able to explain. Um, and of course, it also provides answers to life's biggest questions like what happens to me after I die, right? This is a big reason that polytheistic religions develop in this way. But I don't want you to think that Greeks' polytheism made them similar to other ancient civilizations' religious beliefs. Greek polytheism was actually quite unique for a few reasons, right? The main reason Greek polytheism was unique is because, unlike a lot of other ancient cultures that we've studied, the ancient Greeks did not have any religious texts. They didn't have any scriptures. Right? So Christians have the Bible, Islam has the Quran, Buddhism has the Vedas, or no, Hinduism has the Vedas, Buddhism has the Jataka tales. Um, so the Greeks didn't have anything like that. Instead, they relied pretty much entirely on mythology in order to explain the religion. So, what is mythology? Well, mythology is a term we use to refer to the study of stories that the teller, the author, and the listener know are not true, but they use it anyways to try to give explanations to difficult questions. Right? So the Greeks knew that most of their myths were not actually factually accurate. One of the things about a myth is it contains certain characteristics that tell the person listening to it, yeah, don't take this literally, right? It's a story that you shouldn't take literally. You're supposed to interpret it more in a symbolic way, I guess. Um, so the Greeks used mythology to try to explain the world around them. Now, most Greeks understood that the world around them needed to be explained through science. Remember, that's one of the things that the Greeks are going to develop very, very well compared to ancient cultures. But when they couldn't explain something by science, they tried to sort of fill in the gaps with mythology, even though they realized it wasn't really true. Right? So Greek mythology also included a lot of stories about heroes. And these stories were primarily told for entertainment purposes, but also to demonstrate Greek values. So values about bravery, family loyalty, being clever, being strong. Greek stories and myths also contain lessons about things that Greeks look down upon, right? So a lot of characters in Greek stories that display certain flaws get punished, right? So if you display the flaw of hubris, that's a form of pride, you get punished by the gods or goddesses or by fate, right? And then finally, Greek mythology made the Greek religion seem more real to the Greeks, even though the Greeks knew their stories were not necessarily true. Having that mythology uh, did communicate to the Greeks that the gods and goddesses were very human like, right? And this made them seem more real. The Greek gods and goddesses in these mythological stories have flaws, right? They have needs, they have wants, they have desires, they have goals, they have friends and enemies, they get married, they have children. Importantly, they have human bodies, right? This is pretty unique for ancient cultures. Remember, like in ancient Egypt, for example, the Greek gods and goddesses are um, human animal hybrids. The same thing is true in like ancient Hinduism, right? In ancient Greece, gods and goddesses are human, or they appear to be human. They have human forms, right? And they interact with human beings on a fairly regular basis. Okay, so yeah, one source of Greek polytheism is Greek mythology about the gods and goddesses. Another source of Greek polytheism is Homer. Remember, Homer is credited with being the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which we learned about in the previous, in no, in chapter 13, we learned about the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, the Iliad and the Odyssey are mythological, but they actually have a historical basis. The Iliad, remember, which is the story of the Trojan War, um, is probably based on a real war that happened between the Mycenaean Greeks and the Trojans. Although it didn't happen because of a kidnapped princess, it probably happened because of a trade dispute or competition over resources. Right? Um, in both of these poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, we have the gods interfering with human beings on a very regular basis. In the war, for example, some gods side with the Greeks, other gods side with the Trojans. Gods also influence the fates of all the characters in the story. So, for example, Odysseus has such a difficult time getting home because the goddess Athena and the god Poseidon get in his way. They do not want him to get home. Right. Um, so it's very interesting that the ancient Greeks believed that the gods and goddesses can influence your fate because it led to some interesting beliefs about the nature of free will in ancient Greece. Do you actually get to control your destiny? Do you have any control over what happens in your life? Or is everything good and bad that happens in your life a product of you being in favor with the gods or goddesses? Right? This is going to be an important question because your answer to that question dictates whether or not you think that living your life in a certain way is productive, right? If you think everything's up to the gods and goddesses, then you're just going to kind of throw up your hands and be like, well, I can't control anything anyways. I might as well just live my life however I want to. But if you think that you control your life, that you get to dictate the outcome, then you're going to take steps to ensure that you have the kind of life and future that you want to have. Okay, so the Greeks didn't really see a big difference between the way the gods lived their lives on Mount Olympus and the way they lived their lives down in the city states. So they believed that whatever was going on Mount Olympus would affect what's going on in the different city states. So if two gods were fighting with each other on Mount Olympus, they believed that would have ramifications for what was going on in places like Athens and Sparta. They also believed that things that human beings did could impact the gods. So they thought you could anger or please the gods in different ways, and that depending on if you angered or pleased them, the gods would reward or punish you. Right? So, because of this, religious rituals were a really big part of everyday life in ancient Greece. So, families had shrines that they would pray at. Um, and likewise, public meetings in places like the Acropolis would often begin with a prayer to a god or goddess, and a ritualistic animal sacrifice, which would sometimes take place in a temple. City-states also built temples to the gods. So if you look at ancient Greek ruins that still exist today, they're usually temples because temples were the most well-built structures in ancient Greece, so therefore they lasted the test of time. So most of these temples were not really functional. That means that they were monuments to the gods that contained statues of the gods and goddesses. They really were not used for worship. However, the temples, like I said, were a place where animal sacrifices would take place sometimes. Okay, I think we're going to stop there. Oh, one quick thing that I left out. So yeah, religious rituals are a really big part of everyday life in ancient Greece, and the women who were put in charge of preparing these religious rituals became pretty important, right? So as religious rituals are taking place on a daily basis in ancient Greece, the women who participate in them are acquiring more power. Now, women don't become citizens in the Greek city-states. In Athens, for example, women never actually obtain the right to vote. But the fact that they are essential for performing religious rituals did mean that they had a certain amount of status that was protected. Right? All right. So yeah, the next video I'm going to talk more about mythology as well as things like the Olympic Games and sacred sites in ancient Greece, and maybe we'll get into Greek art and architecture. All right.